animals and man were vegetarians. That was when God gave those instructions to Adam. Now he's giving instructions to Noah, and Noah is told that every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, okay? So that means that in order for the animals to survive and there not be an annihilation of a specific species, animals have got to fear man in order to hide themselves and protect themselves from man, who will now begin to hunt them. Now, does that mean that we should not have domesticated animals? Should all animals then fear us?
No.
That we shouldn't, and why? There is, I just was amazed when I found this. Did you do the homework on the 4 groups of people, and did you look in Revelation to see the 4 faces of the animals that are around, the living beings that are around the throne of God? Did you see that? Who are those 4 faces? Okay, the lion or wild beast. What's the next one? A lamb or a calf, or a calf or an ox or cattle. Your Bible may say livestock. That's the domesticated animals. And who's the next one? Man is human being. And what's the last one? The eagles, flying birds of the air. So look at what God says in verse 2. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast, every bird of the heaven, and what creeps on the ground, and the fish at sea. But look in when he gives his covenant in verse 9. He says, I will establish my covenant with you, every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock. He does not say at the top in verse 2 that the livestock are going to fear him. And livestock, includes the cattle. That may be your, if you have a pet dog or cat or whatever. So there are wild beasts that are to fear man. There are domesticated animals that are referred to as livestock here. And so domesticated animals are excluded from the fear of man. That's why, as a general rule, cows won't run from you, or, they may if you scare them, but they're not going to run and try to hide from you, because they do not have the fear of man like wild beasts do. Okay? So please note that livestock are excluded from the category of fearing man. Okay, let's see. What else did he say? God gives animals as food. So, now some people say God did this so that mankind will begin to understand the value of human life and the value that life is in the blood. Several times here, God's going to say that the life is in the blood, and that he gave this restriction for this fear, so that people will understand that the blood is the life of a living being. And there are no instructions here about anything that they could not eat. We've not gotten to Leviticus yet, where God says these animals are clean and these animals are unclean. So God tells them all of this, all of these animals shall be food for you. But he says, you shall not eat flesh with the blood. Now, how many of you like to eat a medium rare or a rare steak? I do. Have you ever thought, ooh, am I violating this?
No, but he's saying that there's some that are unclean.
He does, but we don't know that yet. We hadn't gotten to Leviticus. This is Noah coming right out of the ark.
He doesn't say all the time, but he does mention it that some animals are unclean.
He does. We will eventually get to that.
He doesn't have to say every. He doesn't have to say every time, but he does mention that the animals that are going into the ark, some of them will be clean animals that eat.
And some are unclean. He does, but that's really not what...
He keeps saying it all the time, but if you go into... When you go into... You see, and you go into Exodus, right?
I know, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, we are not there yet.
We're not there yet.
No, we're not there yet.
We just have to know what God is saying to Noah and his sons. And to Noah and his sons, he says, I'm going to give you every living thing that lives shall be food for you.
No, but you can't look at the Bible like that. You have to.
I know.
We're not there yet, but he's going to tell you in Exodus.
Let me tell you, God has another reason.
He's going to give He's going to give Moses direct information that he keep mentioning from the beginning of the Bible that
there are.
Clean
we're going to get there,
unclean
Bella,
animals.
just not yet. Just not yet. Just hold that thought. Okay, so God says that all these animals are good for you to eat, but he says don't eat the blood. So when we eat the blood today, are we violating this commandment that says don't eat the flesh with the blood in it? Actually, at that time, God equated, and that's why in the blood it says, if you shed blood, I'm going to require a reckoning from man, because God says the life is in the blood. So there began to be, remember God says the reason that he even sent the blood, do you remember what he says in, chapter 6? That I'm sending this blood because what? Every thought of man is what? Evil. They are continuously doing evil, and there is violence on the earth. Okay, so there's lots of shedding of blood. People at that time began to not just worship God, but worship other beings and other things. And one of the things that they did, and we'll find this later on in Genesis, that they will begin to do this again, is because God says life is in the blood, people will take vials of blood, or they will kill an animal and sacrifice it before another god, and take the blood that has been offered as a sacrifice to an animal. They believe if they drink that blood, they inherit or gain one of the characteristics of that god. And so, and people would pour blood over themselves. They would have animals killed and have the blood drained over them, because they then would have additional lifespan. I mean, the things that people come up with regarding blood are unbelievable. But anyway, God says that eating flesh with blood in it at this time in Genesis, is the same thing as taking a life. And so that's why he did not want them to eat flesh with blood in it. They either had to drain the meat of the blood, or they had to boil meat. At that time, most of the time, they boiled things. Okay, so God says, look at this last part. God says there's what? Going to be a reckoning from beast and man for the life of a man. Now, were you surprised to read that animals are going to give an accounting, a reckoning to God for the death of a person, of a human being? And beast and man are going to. So God is holding them accountable. This begins what some people call this the establishment of human government. And the reason, because God says, I'm going to require a reckoning. If someone, an animal, kills a human being, then that animal is to be killed. If a man kills a human being, then that man is to be killed. Therefore, this is the institution of capital punishment. Now, we're not through with the book that God gave us. But this is the situation right here and now that God gives to Noah. Now, how many people are on the earth then? 8. There are 8 people. So he is telling them, if you kill your other brothers here, or your daughters-in-law, or your sisters-in-law, I'm going to require that of you. So God is talking specifically to 8 people when he says, I'm instituting the law of capital punishment. Okay? So God gives authority to man. He says, whoever shed that blood by man. So God says, you are accountable to me. He says twice. He says, I will require a reckoning. God will require a reckoning of the life of man. But God says, I'm going to give the authority to carry out that reckoning or that accountability to man, because in the second part of verse 6, it says by man. So he's giving the authority of humans to have governmental authority or capital punishment authority over mankind, even though God says you are actually being accountable to me. Everybody got that? Okay. So all of them, there were just three brothers. Okay. This is not vengeance. Later on, there will be a period of time in the history of Israel where vengeance is going to take control. This is not vengeance. This is God's justice. It's the same thing that God says through Paul in Romans 13 and actually in Acts 25. You know, I hadn't seen this before. I've certainly read when Paul appeared before Caesar, and he says to Caesar, "If I have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death." See, at that time they knew that God had established a human government to exercise and execute authority over mankind when they do things that are deserving of death. Okay? So even in the New Testament we have that God says there's this government that I'm establishing, this human authority that I'm establishing over you to carry out my will and to seek justice for mankind when blood is shed. Now, does that mean that anyone who kills somebody today should be put to death? We all have different views about capital punishment. But keep this in mind. David, everything that David did, it says David, everything that he did, God was in favor of, except he was a man of God. Everything he did was in God's favor, except what? In the case of Uriah the Hittite, David did everything that God commanded him, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite. And as a result of that, was David put to death? No, because he repented and God exercised his grace and mercy toward David.
But David didn't have Uriah killed because Uriah had killed somebody else.
Wait a minute. But he put him in the front of the line and said, put him in the front and then remove the support from him. So God, and the reason that, John, we know that David is held accountable for it is because why did David not get to build the temple?
Blood on his hands.
Because he was a man of bloodshed. It said he was a man of bloodshed. Now, David fought hundreds of battles. He killed a lot of people. In fact, it's said of him, Saul has killed his hundreds, but David has killed his thousands, remember? So David killed a lot of people, but under the direction of the Lord. But he was not allowed to build the temple, not because he followed the Lord in doing the things that the Lord said to do, and go and conquer that country, go and conquer that city, go and kill everyone in this village. God told him to do that, and David did that. Except in the case of Uriah the Hittite, he shed that man's blood, and God said, because you are a man of bloodshed, you cannot build a temple for me. It was not because David was a man of war that he was not able to build the temple. It was because he killed a man, knowingly, willingly, sent a man to the front lines and said, now when he gets up to the front, withdraw from him so that he may be killed. And he did. And so then he took Bathsheba, who was Uriah's wife, as his own wife. And the Lord was not happy. There are many times that it says David was a man after God's own heart, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite. And because he shed man's blood, he was accountable to God for that blood. And as a result of that, he was not able to build a temple or a house to the Lord. He was able to gather everything, but he could not build it.
The intentions of God is not understandable by man, because what God wants to accomplish, he uses his man to do what he wants to accomplish.
Yes,
because David, but look what David, when David, the child that David had with Bathsheba, the first one, he killed the son, the first one. But then, what happened after he killed the first child?
Okay.
Solomon was the second child. But what did he use with Solomon?
Yes.
Solomon was a man of God.
Right.
And what did Solomon ask of God?
I was just using David as an example of how God expects man to give an accounting for the death of the life of a human being and how valuable it is. Yeah, we'll get to David later on in the things that he did in his family. But I want to tell you this. My father worked at the state penitentiary in Mississippi. Now, at that time, people were sent to prison for selling marijuana and for, you embezzled
Just smoking it.
little money. It was for petty things. So my dad had the privilege of selecting who was in his class. He taught electricity. But he believed that he was there. My dad was a very faithful, godly man. And he believed that he was there to offer the gospel of salvation to everyone who was there. So he often visited people who were on death row or who were what were considered more hardened criminals. The people that were in Dad's class were really not they were mostly 18 to 20-year-old people.
But look
And
at
so-
the crimes that people do.
Let me just finish my story about my dad, Let me just finish.
The governor, the guy
Yes.
shot her to her head, and what kind of crime is that?
Okay, let me just finish with my story about my dad, okay? Okay, so, when he went to see these people who were hardened criminals, he said, there are some men who simply cannot be rehabilitated. Because he witnessed to a number of people, and there are some people who are so violent by nature that rehabilitation won't change them. Now, did you do your homework, question number 3?
Yes.
What did you come up with?
Numbers 35, verse 16.
Numbers
35, 16.
Mm-hmm.
Exodus 21:23.
Life for life, yes. You came up with some others, Okay.
Exodus what? Exodus 21:23. Okay.
Okay. So good. All right. Let's see what the Noahic covenant is. We got to move on here. I'm gonna run out of time. Let's see. We're in verse 8. Then God, chapter 9, verse 8. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark, for it is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God says, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring the clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And what does it mean for God to remember something? I told you that last week. To begin to act on somebody's behalf. Remember, God doesn't forget. He just begins to act on behalf. And the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. It doesn't say that floods won't destroy some flesh. It says floods will never destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Now, did you find any differences? Where's my field? Did you find any differences in what you saw in chapter 8 and what you saw in chapter 9? Who was the covenant with in chapter 8?
God was speaking to God.
God was speaking to a God. In chapter 8, he spoke to himself. In chapter 9, who's he speaking to? Noah and who else? Noah and his sons. Okay, and who is he establishing his covenant with in chapter 8?
The human race.
He is, but what is added in chapter 9? Animals. Every creature that came out of the ark. Every creature that came out of the ark is added in chapter 9. So what was the basis of God's judgment here? Why did he send this judgment, and why did he decide, I understand that how is mankind?
He was evil.
The intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Mankind is evil.
But,
Okay.
but Noah Did God think Noah and his sons' hearts were evil?
No, Noah was righteous and obedient, and he walked with God.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Now we're going to see something. Let's see. Let me go through the Noah covenant. They all went out. It includes all that went out from the ark. It is an everlasting covenant. That means it's unilateral. It is it's sometimes called a royal covenant. That means that the covenant is not dependent on the acceptance of the recipient of the covenant. So God made a covenant for which Noah had no responsibility. Noah had he did nothing to receive the covenant. I mean, God did this on his own. So it's considered an everlasting covenant. The rainbow is a sign. Did you look at the other signs?
Yes.
What signs did you come up with?
The rainbow, circumcision, and Sabbath.
Yes, circumcision and the Sabbath. The Abrahamic covenant has the sign of circumcision, and the Mosaic covenant has the sign of the Sabbath. Did you read the passages, Genesis 9, Ezekiel 1, and Revelation 4, to see about the rainbow?
Yes.
In Genesis 9, Noah saw the rainbow after the flood, or after the storm. And in Ezekiel 1, when did Ezekiel see the rainbow? In the midst, or during the storm, or the flood. And when John saw it, in Revelation 4, when did John see it? Before God's judgment began. So, there's always been a rainbow. My point here is, God does not need the water particles to make a rainbow. I mean, there are some people who now say that, we know why there is a rainbow, and it's the reflection of the sun on the water particles. However, God doesn't need, and so they don't believe that there was actually a flood because we have a scientific explanation for the rainbow, which is true. But God doesn't need water particles to make a rainbow. There is a rainbow around his throne today. So let's see. How many times does God say never again?
3.
And then there's one also in chapter 8. So he says, never again am I going to do this. Never again. He doesn't say that there won't be a flood. He says there won't be a flood over all of the earth to destroy all of the earth, and there won't be a flood to destroy all of mankind. So there are a lot of people who do not believe that there is a flood. That's one of the reasons I wanted Jack to come and talk to us. Pardon?
Or the creatures.
Or the creatures. You're right. So now let's see. We got to see about Noah. You read this story about Noah. What did you think about that story of Noah?
God don't like scandals. He don't. Well, you see, the thing about God is God is a spirit, and he also displays his human characteristics of himself.
What did you think about the story of Noah and what happened to Noah in verses 18 to 28?
For me, when his daughters give him the wine to drink, and then
It didn't say the daughters gave him the wine to drink. It says Noah planted a vineyard. Noah became a vintner. Let's read what he says. The sons of Noah, verse 18, went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah. From these people, the whole earth was dispersed. Noah began to be a man of the soil. Now, we don't know that Noah was a man of the soil initially. He probably had to have some kind of carpentry work to build an ark. But he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on their shoulders, and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backwards, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. And he also said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. And after the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and then he died. Now, Okay, so Noah walked with God. It says that he was obedient. He did what he was considered righteous before God. But now we see Noah planted a vineyard, he drank wine, and he got drunk. Now this is several years after the flood, and the reason that we know that is because Canaan is mentioned here, and Canaan is which son of Ham? The fourth son of Ham. So we know that time has gone by. So we don't think that Noah particularly invented fermentation of grapes. God doesn't say there's anything wrong with growing grapes or even fermenting grapes. And I'm going to talk to you about alcohol in just 1 second. But, so the writer here does not talk about the consumption of wine. It doesn't even say that Noah was wrong in doing what he did. But why do you think that God wanted us to know about Noah and what happened to him in his latter years in his life?
Because sin was creeping back.
Absolutely. Let's see, did I tell you all that? Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Noah's...
The sin nature of man did not die with the flood.
Absolutely. Noah was obedient, blameless, and righteous. And now Noah is drunk and naked. Noah drank too much and he became intoxicated, and we know that it's several years after the flood because he mentions Canaan. Now, I want you to know this. Wine is really not forbidden in Scriptures. What it says about wine in Ephesians is that you shall not be drunk with wine. In fact, in Judges, do you remember when Gideon, you know who Gideon is? And Gideon fought for the Lord. He put a fleece out for the Lord. Okay, so Gideon was a man who followed the Lord's instructions. And when he died, he had 70 sons, because he had wives and he had concubines. He had 70 sons. Guess what happened to those 70 sons? They were all killed by one who was the son of a concubine, Abimelech. So Abimelech later was killed, but in that, God said in that book, let me find Judges so I can tell you exactly what it says. It's in Judges chapter 9. It says, the one son that was left was Jotham, and he says he's giving this parable. You know, Jesus taught in parable. Well, Jotham gives a parable to the men who actually supported the killing of the 69 sons of Gideon, or Jerubbaal is who his name is referred to here. He says, shall I leave my vine that cheers God and men and go hold sway over the rest? There was a period of time when God didn't say drinking wine was wrong. I mean, I grew up, my grandmother says, don't drink, dance, cuss, or chew, and do not go with boys who do. So that was kind of the rule at my house, and I just believe that we did not have alcohol in my home, neither of my parents drank, until my mother was 85, and her doctor told her that she needed to drink a glass of red wine at night. Well, so here's what, she took one of those little juice glasses, and my dad, who'd never been in liquor stores, went and bought her red wine, screw top, red wine, and she did this because it was medicine. And so I was in Mississippi one time when she was doing this. I said, I'm gonna taste this. So I tasted it. It was all. I said, oh my goodness, Mother, how do you drink this? She said, well, it's medicine. It's good for my heart. I mean, that's how she thought of wine.
I can see her saying that.
It was just medicine. I mean, it was just like she had to do this because it was medicine. So anyway.
But later in the Bible they say, whosoever becomes deceived by alcohol,
Drunk with wine. Drunk with wine.
But Jesus Christ turned water into wine.
Yes, he did. So let me just tell you
about it. It's not a bad
that.
thing to drink, but it's just that. Okay, you see in the Bible where the Pharisees and the Sadducees who were self-righteous, and you have the self-righteousness in the church where some people are trying to be self-righteous where they're trying to, but that's not about the righteousness of God. The thing about it is that people are just...
Well, let me just tell you about my experience with alcohol. I mean, that's how I was taught. I was brought up that you just didn't drink wine, or you didn't drink anything at all. And I went to seminary, and after the first semester, I got to know these young people. I was by far one of the oldest people there. There were probably two of us that were my age. Most of them were between 20 and 25 that were, studying in seminary. After the first semester, some of these young men and women were no longer there. After the second semester, some more left. After the third semester, more left. And I was like, well, where did they go? Well, they went to this seminary, and they went to that. They switched to this and that. And you know why? Because I was attending a Southern Baptist seminary, and Southern Baptist seminary, you have to sign a piece of paper that says you're not going to drink alcohol of any kind. They wouldn't sign it because they said that's not what God says. God says don't be drunk with wine. So I decided maybe I need to look into this a little more because I just had always been taught we're not supposed to drink. In fact, I thought it was actually a sin. Paul told Timothy that he was to drink wine for his stomach. And then I found that there's also in Psalms, it says that wine gladdens the heart of men. So in the Old Testament, I know God did not say you're not to drink wine, and he actually did not say that in the New Testament either. In fact, in Psalms 31, it says that wine was used as a sedative, and it was used for medicinal purposes, okay? So, but let me tell you this. What he does say is you are not to become addicted to wine. There is quite a difference in becoming addictive. And then, when I studied this and I studied this, I thought, there's got to be something more, Lord, that you want us to know about this. Because we can be addicted to anything. I will tell you, after visiting with the young women today, husbands are addicted to many things. Well, wives can be addicted also. Pornography is absolutely rampant. But when you will not spend time with your children because you are on the internet viewing things, initially it might not impact things, but eventually there is going to be a change in the relationship of a man and his wife when one or the other is addicted to pornography. More and more of our young people today don't have an addiction to alcohol. They are addicted to narcotics or opioids, or they are addicted to gaming.
Their phone.
I could not believe how many people are addicted to gaming. So any kind of addiction, and so I read this, and I thought, God, surely there is something that you want us to know about this. And it's in the book of Hosea, of all things. You know, Hosea, God gave us the book of Hosea as an example of a people who turn away from him and they seek other gods. Because Hosea's wife did that. Hosea left him, and she became a harlot, and the Lord said, no, bring her back. Eventually, he brought her back to himself. But here's what God says about wine and new wine in Hosea chapter 4, verse 10. It takes away our understanding. And so when I looked that up, what that means is when you drink wine in excess, or any addiction, it can be opioids, it can be anything. It can be gaming that these kids are involved in today. It takes away our longing for the Lord, because he equates it with harlotry. Taking too much of anything in excess that takes us away from God becomes harlotry, and we don't want that. He doesn't say, don't play any video games, don't look at any pornography, don't drink any wine. He doesn't say that. In the past, our ancestors have put out some vices and said, these are things that you should not do, and if you do, you're not going to be a member of our congregation. One of those for Southern Baptist is drinking wine. But listen, in today's environment, drinking wine is minor compared to what people are into today. Now, he doesn't say don't drink wine. He says don't drink wine in excess, so that it takes away your understanding. It takes away your longing for the Lord God. That's what he has objection to. Anything. I have a friend who, when she was, I guess in her 40s, she was obsessed with exercise. If she did not get up and go and exercise, the day was ruined. The day was just simply ruined. It became so obsessive to her. Now, there's nothing wrong with exercise. Exercise is good. Anything in moderation, but not to the point that it took the place of making her day. If she didn't have an hour that she could go and exercise in the morning, she might as well just stay at home. Now, is that not silly? Some men are like that about fishing, about golf, about cars. I mean, we become obsessed with things. I have another friend who was obsessed with shoes. I mean, she had well over 1,000 pairs of shoes. I mean, now I love shoes, but really? So if she was in any way down, we had to go get a pair of shoes. I did not know how many pairs of shoes that woman had until she showed me in her closet. She had taken, there were 2 closets. One of them was nothing but shoes. And I thought, oh my goodness, how do you keep up with all of these? And she said, oh, come here. And so we went in 2 other bedroom closets, nothing but shoes. I just thought, how do you even know what you have? Well, she didn't know, but it was an obsession. Anything that takes the place of God in our lives, God is opposed to. So that's why it's not that he says, don't drink and don't do this and don't do that. It's that anything that becomes an obsession that takes the place of our understanding and our longing of who God is, that is wrong. That's what God objects to, okay? So, let's see. What is this nakedness that we got to look at here? Possible explanations for he saw the nakedness of his father. Now, I just listed these for you because different people have different ideas of what this means. It's a euphemism for castration. It's sodomy. It can be incest. It can be cohabitation with his mothers. Or most of the, I'm going to say moderate theologians say that he disrespected his father and he dishonored him by seeing his nakedness. But there are places, bless you, where God says, if you see the nakedness of your mother, that means that they have had a relationship with their mother. And anyway, so those are different explanations. I can tell you there's a lot written on what does the nakedness of his father mean. And there are some who say that this cohabitation with his mother produced Canaan. It does not say that, it says that Ham was the youngest son, Canaan was the youngest son of Ham. Okay? So, some people say because of this event, and the reason they say that it was an event is because it says he knew what his youngest son had done to him. So there was a specific event, an activity, something happened. And so they decided that it was, and remember, going in and taking the spouse or a concubine of another person at that time meant that you then were exercising authority over whatever that person had rulership over. So it was possibly Ham saying, I'm going to now usurp the authority of my father, Noah. We know that some of David's sons, remember, did that, went into one of David's wives to usurp the authority that David had because he says, I'm now going to be king. Well, some people say that Ham went forward and slept with his mother, and as a result, Canaan was a result of that relationship. Most of the moderate theologians say that no, Ham dishonored and disrespected his father by seeing his nakedness, and he went out and told his brothers, said, y'all need to go in here and see what I saw. But instead of them going in and mocking their father, they went in backwards and covered him up. Noah was so drunk and intoxicated, he had done what Hosea says. He had lost his understanding. And here was a man who walked with God. He was considered obedient, righteous, and yet look what he's doing now. So I thought about, okay, Lord, what are you telling us Oh, let me get to that. Why curse Canaan? You see, he cursed Canaan. Why didn't he curse Ham? So some people say that the reason that he cursed Canaan is because Canaan was the result of that relationship of Ham and his mother. And some say it was because Joshua, remember this was written during the time, probably Moses wrote this and consolidated all of these writings for us. And that at that time, the Israelites had such problems with the Canaanites that the scribes substituted the name of Canaan here, and actually he cursed Ham. And some people say it actually was Canaan that did this act, whatever this act was, and it was not Ham. And that's why that the top part says when Ham went in, that it really was Canaan that went in. So I don't know. Some people say it's the, let me read this, principle of lex talionis judgment. That means that the youngest son of Noah is responsible for the curse that is placed on the youngest son of his own youngest son. So notice, who is he blessing? Does he bless Shem? Said bless what?
The Lord.
The God of Shem.
Be God, the Lord, the God. He's blessing the Lord God of Shem. So why do you think that God had us read this story? I mean, why did he write this for us? I'm going to hurry. Here's a man who was a preacher of righteousness. We are told in Hebrews that he is a preacher of righteousness. He obeyed God in all things. He walked with God. And at the end of his life, he gets drunk and is so out of it, not understanding what he's doing, that he probably was hot and he just took all his clothes off. Inhibitions were gone away, and so he took all his clothes off. So Charles Spurgeon says that God never allows his children to sin successfully. We're never free from the danger of falling into the trouble of sin. So you and I are one of the older classes here. We need to strive to end well. We are never away from the pool of sin, regardless of our age. So I read this week. I thought, oh, my mother would have loved this. There was, Robertson McQuinlan, who is Columbia International University in Columbia, South Carolina. He was doing some of his deacon duties, and he was driving an older lady who had arthritis, very crippling arthritis. He was taking her to her physicians, and she said to him, Robertson, why does God let us get old and weak? Why do I have to hurt so? And he said, well, I'm not sure, but I have a theory. Now, he was the president of a university. And she said, well, what's your theory? And he said, I think God has planned the strength and beauty of youth to be physical. But the strength and beauty of age is spiritual. So we gradually lose the strength and beauty that is temporary. So we'll be sure to concentrate on the strength and beauty that is forever. So, and my mother always said, he just left me here to pray. I mean, that's all she could come up with. I don't know why I'm here. She would often say, I don't know why I'm here. But because we had a strength and beauty of our youth, but we just can't do what we used to do. I can't do what I used to do. So that we will concentrate, but those things are temporary. So that we will concentrate on the strength and beauty of our age, which is spiritual. We have time now to focus on the Lord, to see what he says to us. If you are still living and breathing, he has a purpose for us, even, yes, at our age. In fact, I had another story. I know we don't have time, but there was a man who preached, and when he reached the age of 70 or 72, his congregation thought, this is time for you to retire from, because we need to bring in these young people, blah, blah, blah. So what did he do? He was called to be a missionary, and he lived until he was 89, and he was one of the most revered missionaries of India. So even at 75, this man went to overseas to be a missionary. So regardless of what our age is, God has a purpose for us. He has something that he wants us to accomplish. He may leave you here till you're 110.
It's all in your mind, because
It can be in our
the
mind.
rest of us is that God, the purpose of God is that
That we are to glorify Him. Yes, whatever we do,
the
whatever
rest
we
of
do.
us is going to happen to the best of us, that even though that's why some people fall off eventually, because
But He has a plan. He has a plan and purpose, and we need to fulfill it.
Ladies, before you get out, the first Thursday is this Thursday, Whistle Stop and Tom Balls, 11 o'clock.
And if you need a ride, let me know, and I will pick